Hello, everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we examine Shakespeare's great comedy, The Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice is one of Shakespeare's grandest comedies, standing alongside The Taming of the Shrew and A Midsummer Night's Dream, along with As You Like It and Twelfth Night. While it is much easier now to transform The Merchant of Venice into a tragedy, where the crude comedy of modernity appears in implicit ridicule and hypocritical expose of the now truncated Christian characters, to do so strips the play of its power and insight in contrasting legalistic justice and merciful forgiveness. These two themes reveal to us two polar opposite worlds, as well as Shakespeare's passionate plea for the world of forgiveness instead of the world of strict justice, which reminds us of the Greek understanding of retributive justice. Just as it was in Shakespeare's time, the question of justice, mercy, and society remain as relevant as ever, and we have much to learn from the great bard of Angledom. Like the poets of antiquity, the troubadours of France, and the poets of the late Renaissance, Shakespeare is preoccupied with the theme of love and how it is often contrasted with politics, as we've also been exploring in many of our episodes on Shakespeare's plays. While the poets of old often found love in the form of struggle, especially in the context of war, where love becomes the single refuge and respite from the chaotic storm of bloodshed, part of Shakespeare's revolution was to find the struggle for love in the adventure and misfortune of life itself, however mundane and exciting it might be. Here, The Merchant of Venice undeniably shines as the struggle for love, specifically between Portia and Bassanio, is threatened by the turbulence of misfortune, revenge, and the legalities of justice. But love in the play is secondary to the thematic deconstruction of strict legalistic justice. Shakespeare, thus, is exploring the question of whether love can flourish in a world of dog-eat-dog justice, the kind of justice that most of us probably clamor for in our darkest moments. It is important to remember that traditional comedy was a dramatic form that began in unhappiness and ended in happiness. Comedy was not about cheap laughs to distract us from the daily grind of modern industrial life at the expense of the target of ridicule, like most contemporary insult, quote, comedy today. Rather, it was principally concerned with the struggle for happiness to manifest itself in a cruel, cold, and often dark world. The Merchant of Venice sets the somber tone of sadness with the weariness of Antonio, likely over losing his camaraderie with Bassanio. In sooth, I know not why I am sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies me. So at the very beginning, we have the unhappiness that sets the tone for the play. The restlessness of Antonio, whose mind is tossing on the ocean, is subsequently contrasted with the hopeful love of Bassanio and Portia, prefigured for us when Bassanio exalts, "In Belmont is a lady richly left, and she is fair and fairer than that word, of wondrous virtues. Sometimes from her eyes I did receive fair speechless messages. Her name is Portia." From the onset of the play, Shakespeare tips his hat to us. He begins the play in an atmosphere of unease and restlessness, but also prefigures the hopeful end in marriage, an image that Shakespeare often deals with and can be found in Henry V, Richard III, and The Tempest, among other plays. While Shakespeare introduces us to the lead characters and prefigures others, the sudden emergence of Shylock is not previously hinted at, and his appearance and subsequent development in the play help pry the worlds of justice and mercy apart, to which we need reconciliation and a conclusion. As we know, Shylock is a Jew and a usurer. He has loaned Bassanio 3,000 ducats for him to help court Portia. As we later learn, Bassanio has lost his estate and lives in relative poverty compared to other high lords and merchantmen throughout the city. Shylock is introduced to us as a merciless exploiter of his customers, seeing them not as soulful persons, but mere bonds and pieces of paper he has contracted with. After being introduced to Shylock, he quickly makes an aside when learning that Bassanio's benefactor is Antonio, a man whom Shylock despises. "How like a fawning publican he looks! I hate him for he is a Christian, but more for that in low simplicity he lends out money gratis, and brings down the rate of usurance here with us in Venice. Cursed by my tribe, I forgive him." We learn that Antonio and Shylock have long a tangled history together. Antonio treats Shylock poorly, even cruelly, but also rescues Shylock's hapless victims from his gripping legalism, which adds to Shylock's venom against Antonio. Shylock's animosity toward Antonio is, as the famous "hath not a Jew eye" speech reveals, all too natural. We all share this fallible human condition with a dark tendency for resentment and want for revenge that we cloak up in the language of justice to make ourselves feel better about our crass, craven desires. Whenever Shakespeare inserts an aside into his plays, most visibly manifested in the likes of Richard III and Hamlet, we learn the true motives and thoughts of the characters. When Shylock says he hates Antonio, and that he will be cursed if he forgives the Christian merchantman of Venice, Shylock really means it. He has no veil to hide his innermost thoughts and desires. Shylock's aside reveal the totality of his psychology. Yet, in this aside, Shakespeare also begins to foreshadow the need for forgiveness and how forgiveness heals the ruptured world of legalistic justice, hate, and revenge. Indeed, forgiveness and mercy, which are themes tied together throughout the play, just as love and joy are the most commonly reoccurring themes spoken of throughout The Merchant of Venice. Earlier, Portia had spoken of the value of forgiveness when speaking of the Monsieur Le Bon, one of her many potential suitors. Thus, the stage is set, as it were, for the conflict between the natural desires for vengeance and the mercy of forgiveness. The Merchant of Venice explores the worlds, as mentioned, of strict justice and merciful forgiveness. This is what Shakespeare primarily teases out and moves to conclusion as the play develops. Justice in the play carries an overture of hypermasculinity with its insistence on the legality of technicality and desire for harm. Mercy, by contrast, carries an overture of the feminine and the need to set aside one's desires in a spirit of sacrificial giving, as revealed by Portia, and interestingly enough, also by Bassanio. In fact, the test of the suitors to win Portia also reflects this masculine-feminine division that Shakespeare is exploring. The Prince of Morocco chooses the gold casket because it promises all that men desire, and the prideful Prince of Aragon chooses the silver casket because he believes himself meritoriously deserving Portia's heart in marriage. "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves," the casket reads. In both cases, the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Aragon see marriage as a contractual right for their desires. As such, both fail to see the need for sacrifice in marriage. "Who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath." It is only Bassanio who has an aura of the feminine through his compassion, friendliness, and willingness to sacrifice for others who chooses correctly. Portia gives him her ring as the visible sign of their love and prospective marriage. Portia also advises him to aid Antonio in his time of need. With Antonio's ships having been struck with the misfortune of disaster overseas, Shylock pounces on both with his strict insistence on the justice owed to him and the desire to now harm Antonio over their past grievances and affairs. Antonio begs for mercy. Shylock scoffs and brushes aside Antonio's pleas. The movement to the dramatic court scene is nigh. Shakespeare's great parody of justice and his criticism of the legality of justice and the dark hole that it digs comes into view during the infamous court scene. Shylock insists that he secure his bonds and oaths made with Antonio. Antonio insists on mercy. The Duke of Venice also pleads for some mercy, but touched with human gentleness and love, forgive a moriarty of the principal, glancing an eye of pity on his losses, that have of so late so huddled his back. But the Duke's plea ultimately falls to the responsibility of the Doctor of Laws, who, it turns out, is none other than Portia. That Portia enters the public world of men, disguised as a man, reveals the hypermasculine legalism of the justice system, and offers Shakespeare's subtle critique of it. Punishment and the letter of the law hold sway, at least according to the letter of the law. The masculine desire for harm is, Shakespeare is saying, cruel. Thus, Portia, a woman, offers a heartfelt plea for mercy in one of the most universally celebrated Shakespearean speeches. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred way. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. An earthly power doth then show like as God's, when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same player doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I have spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which, if thou follow this strict court of Venice, must needs give sentence 'gainst the merchant there. Portia's plea for mercy also evokes Deuteronomy 32, a subtle nod to the qualities of mercy deep within the Jewish religion. My doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, and the small rain upon the tender herb, and the showers upon the grass. Portia's plea, therefore, also calls forth the best in Shylock's committed Judaism, to overcome the mere letter of the law and see the spirit which the law itself is meant to foster and promote: justice through mercy and forgiveness, not through retribution and revenge. However, Portia's plea for mercy does not crack the hardened heart of Shylock. Consequently, Portia becomes a man, so to speak, in resorting to the technicalities of legalism to break Shylock and make him beg for mercy, just as he made Antonio, and so many others can beg for mercy and distill into the court the reality that mercy is the hallmark of justice. When Bassanio arrives and offers to pay off thrice over the debt owed to Shylock, an ensuing quibble breaks out over the pound of flesh that was stipulated in the bond. Portia reads the bond literally through the letter of the law. Shylock may take his pound of flesh, but not a drop of blood, because blood was not stipulated. With that, Shylock is cornered. Portia further enters this manly world of strict legalistic justice to bring forth an old law in Venice, wherefrom a foreigner intending to kill a Venetian forfeits 1/2 of his belongings to the intended victim and 1/2 to the state. Portia's delving deeper into legalistic justice, what the Greeks called tissus, retributive justice, reveals for us the absurdities and the darkness of obsessive justice. The justice of the law only sinks us deeper into the abyss, as Portia ironically reveals in her delving deeper into the strict world of legalistic justice. There can be no reconciliation through the strict following of the law. Justice has all condemned, as Portia also reminded everyone in her speech. In a brilliant sequence, Shakespeare lays bare for us the limits of justice and the futility of justice in providing for the so-called just society. Justice leaves us blinded. The insistence on justice, as reflected by Shylock and as parodied by Portia, turns us all into ravenous animals in a fight against each other that ends, ultimately, in destruction. Indeed, this is what was entailed by Gratanio when he spoke to Shylock about how Shylock's insistence on the letter of the law would lead him to waver in his faith and hold opinion with Pythagoras, that souls of animals infuse themselves into the trunks of men. Thy currish spirit governed a wolf who, hanged for human slaughter, even from the gallows did his fell soul fleet, and whilst thou layest in thy unhallowed dam, infused itself in thee, for thy desires are wolvish, bloody, starved, and ravenous. It is the court scene where Shakespeare mocks and deconstructs the hollowness of the claims and the slogans and the motto of justice. The justice demanded by Shylock is merciless. I crave the law, he says. But the reflections on legalistic justice, making us wolvish, bloody, starved, and ravenous, applies to the Christians as much as it does to Shylock. Here, Shakespeare deconstructs the constant failures, as he also does through Shylock's eloquent speech, hath not a Jew eyes, of Christians to live up to the high ideals of mercy and forgiveness, which trump justice. What shall win in this great contest? Merciful forgiveness, or the retributive justice demanded by the letter of the law, that we all stand guilty before? Portia's speech reminds us that we are guilty. Though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. In the midst of this storm, we must remember that the beautiful marriages of Lorenzo and Jessica and Portia and Bassanio have been disturbed by the misfortunes now plaguing Antonio, Shylock, and Bassanio, which infect the entire city and the lives of everyone present. Their misfortunes extend beyond themselves and affect all of their friends and their family. The world of retributive justice disturbs the harmony of marriage, love, and joy, the peace of the city, which is now being wrought in great conflict. With that world interrupted, with the world of peace, joy, love, and marriage disturbed by the clamoring for strict justice, how can love be restored and reconciled to that naughty world? The answer, of course, is through mercy. The reality of merciful forgiveness, restoring the world to right relationships, is how the play concludes. True, Shylock now begs for mercy, as he made Antonio and others beg for mercy, but mercy is granted, and he is reborn through his conversion to Christianity, admittedly implying here that Judaism is the religion of strict justice, while Christianity is the religion of mercy. While sensitive to modern audiences, we must remember the power of this scene and the deconstruction of justice Shakespeare had in mind when he composed his work. Having just laid bare the insufficiencies of justice and the need for mercy to win the hearts of all, it would have been natural for the Christian audience to want revenge against Shylock for his malevolence toward Antonio. But this would have pulled us right back into the abyss we were climbing out of. The return to the abyss through the demands of justice is not what Shakespeare gives us. The mercy extended to Shylock and his conversion is meant to be scandalous. The conversion of Shylock breaks the normative expectations of the audience and the audience's desire for retribution. It also exposes the venomous shortcomings of the audience and how it would have wanted to deal with Shylock due to his own bigotry and prejudices, which, mind you, are scattered all throughout his asides and speeches. Mercy wins out, as the Duke somewhat calculatedly states, that thou shalt see the difference of our spirit. I pardon thee thy life before thou ask it. Furthermore, the fact that such merciful forgiveness is extended to a minority and a malcontent like Shylock also tells us much about Shakespeare. Shakespeare is literally, in this play, calling for mercy to be extended to minorities and malcontents, who often suffer the full force of legalistic justice from an unempathetic society. This appeal for mercy to the minority and the malcontent, dare we remember, is an appeal found in the writings of a late 16th century author. It is remarkable to consider this when one puts that into perspective. Shakespeare is calling for mercy to those whom society, even today in the 21st century, wants nothing to deal with. In a lighter and more comedic vein, the ending of The Merchant of Venice reinforces the need for merciful forgiveness, which we just witnessed in dramatic fashion in the fourth act. While Lorenzo and Jessica flirtatiously play with each other in Belmont near a garden, Bassanio returns to make good his life with Portia. However, Bassanio had given away the ring that Portia had given him as a sign of their marriage. Bassanio now pleads for forgiveness before Portia. In order for marriage, for love to endure, forgiveness must triumph, and triumph it does. When Portia forgives Bassanio and reveals herself to have been the judge all along, the little candle and its shining light is manifested for all to see. This dim light shines forth brightly and triumphantly in the dark, naughty world that was tarnished by retribution and the demands of justice. Song, joy, and party now abound in the world healed by merciful forgiveness. The world absent of merciful forgiveness is naughty, bloody, and ravenous. The world filled with merciful forgiveness heals and brings life with light and love, illuminating it, where individuals, lovers, are united in song, dance, and joy. Not only does Shakespeare deconstruct the limits of justice for us, he also shows us how a world strictly concerned with justice cannot be a world where love and life can flourish. Mercy is the necessary antidote to the world of justice. Moreover, the feminine quality of mercy and the feminine insistence on compassion balance the masculine quality of justice and the masculine insistence on retributive right. Shakespeare does more to advance the compassionate and the softer side of life through his comedy than those who would transform the play into a tragedy where the difficult struggle, a truly difficult struggle for compassionate mercy, is brushed aside as unmeaningful. May we follow Shakespeare and pardon the crimes of others and bring forth reconciliation rather than demand the strict letter of justice, which only divides and deepens the chasm between aggrieved and vengeful parties. The Merchant of Venice stands as one of the greatest of Shakespeare's plays because it does deconstruct and lay bare the shortcomings of a society that is totally concerned with the strict demands of justice and exposes its emptiness. The struggle for mercy, rather than the struggle for justice, is the harder path to take. The manifestation of mercy, however hard that path may be, nevertheless brings healing and closure. The fruits of mercy is the end of retributive revenge and the realization of the joyous serenity of love and life and song as we witness at the play's conclusion. When we read The Merchant of Venice as a contest between the struggle for mercy in a world burdened and overwhelmed by the insistence on strict justice, we living in the 21st century have much to consider, given that we often hear slogans for justice rather than slogans for mercy. Shakespeare shows us in The Merchant of Venice that if we march to the tune of, quote, justice, our world will burn, retribution, revenge, horror is what follows. If our world chooses, and if our society chooses mercy, mercy is what brings forgiveness. Mercy is what brings reconciliation. Mercy, not justice, is what allows life and love to actually flourish in the world. Given the state of our own society, and given the state of the world today, we might be wise to reread and listen to the wisdom of Shakespeare in The Merchant of Venice. Is mercy more important than justice? Does justice necessarily lead us to conflict and revenge? Shakespeare asks us, through The Merchant of Venice, to consider the possibility that true justice, if we want to keep the term justice, is found in mercy.